Let's get some more on this China delegation from Michael Shoebridge from Strategic Analysis Australia. Good to talk to you again, Michael. First up, do you think both the Australian Prime Minister and the Chinese Premier will see this as a successful visit so far?
Well, I think state media back in Beijing will be pretty pleased with the stage-managed triumphal footage that they have got out of this. But if the Prime Minister thinks this has been a success, I think he's gravely mistaken. All of this fake goodwill and the desperate authoritarian bubble that the Albanese government have put around this visit only shows how we have no trust in this relationship, and it shows the enormous gap between the Australian population who distrust the Chinese government and this fake celebratory visit that the government has confected.
Well, I'll come to Chang Lei's experience in just a moment, but before we go there, I want to focus on this idea that Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong keep going on about, saying the relationship has been stabilised. Now, as I said in that intro, if it's stabilised, then it's stabilised in a very bad place, hasn't it? Because we still have Chinese trade sanctions against us for nothing than expressing sensible views as a sovereign nation. And we're also seeing no apology and no step back from the military intimidation that the Chinese armed forces have levelled at our Defence Force personnel.
No, so Premier Li said we should shelve our differences. And what he means by that is Australia should shelve any differences we have with Beijing and let Beijing get on with doing exactly what they want. And one of those things is using its military deliberately and dangerously in ways that are going to cause injury and death to the servicemen and women in our military. Now, Mr Albanese says he's got dialogue that will manage that. Well, let's see the Chinese military stop endangering our military in the region. So far, there are no successes to this stabilisation that we've apparently achieved, only these fake visits with distrust just underneath.
Yeah, and they just don't get it. They don't understand the way a free society operates. We saw that with the press conference today, the attempt to screen out, shield Chang Lei at the press conference. This is a woman that they incarcerated in China for 3 years for essentially nothing under very, very obscure references to national security. And then after this was shown and created the kerfuffle, we heard our own Prime Minister give a press conference sometime later when obviously he would have been briefed about this, and he claimed not to know anything about it. Here's the Prime Minister.
Well, I didn't see that. I saw Chang Lei and we smiled at each other.
Isn't that pathetic, Michael Shoebridge? He's pretending he didn't know anything about it so that he doesn't have to say anything that will offend the Chinese.
Well, remember when he met Xi Jinping in San Diego days after the Chinese military had injured one of our Navy divers, he didn't feel he could raise anything uncomfortable there either. So his whole way of operating is to stick his fingers in his ears and close his eyes and pretend if he claps his heels together, he'll be back in Kansas, surrounded by unicorns and rainbows. He cannot face the China challenge, and his policy, he knows, is a failing one. So I think it's appalling behaviour, and to have this authoritarian bubble that Premier Li has travelled in right here in the heart of our democracy, I think is just abhorrent.
It's a worry. You go to, they're on their way to Western Australia now, where there's no shortage of commercial and governmental sycophancy towards China because they rely on it so heavily for their mineral exports. Do we expect that Premier Li will throw another gift on the table as he leaves, perhaps allowing lobster exports, perhaps just allowing some of our trade that they have punished us with the trade bans on to resume?
I don't think so. I think that's for lesser Communist Party underlings than Premier Li to throw another bone to the Australian government. I think what he's doing in Western Australia is telling the federal and state governments to let Chinese companies do what they want to get hold of critical minerals, because he knows that at least in that area of policy, we occasionally say no.
Thanks for joining us, Michael. Appreciate your analysis.